Hello, and welcome to Lore Watch, a roundtable freeform discussion about lore and our favorite media. I am your host, Joe Perez, one of several lore-focused folks from Blizzard Watch, and I've got my marvelous co-host with me today, Matt Rossi. How you doing today, Matt?
Insert Spider-Man comment here. Actually, I'm going to talk about real fast because I think you will find it amusing. They released a bunch of what-if novels a while back, and I just happened across the one, what if Wanda Maximoff and Peter Parker were siblings? Where the Parkers are on a mission in Latveria. They find like a weird techno crash where it's hinted to be the High Evolutionaries place, and they get one of the babies, Wanda, but the other one they don't get. And they take him back and they raise her alongside Peter. They're about the same age. It's really weird. It's really, really weird. It is a very odd coupling. I don't think Spider-Man and the Scarlet Witch have spent a lot of time around each other in comics. I mean, they've been there for group stuff, but these are not people who've talked often.
No, but the what if comics are always a weird mishmash of that sometimes. But
I think that's why it works. But anyway, go ahead.
I was going to say, if that's something you want us to talk about, you can always go ahead and let us know. I do want to say that if you do want us to talk about anything in particular, you have questions for us or any of our shows, we have 3 of them at this point, you can go ahead and send those into podcast@blizzardwatch.com, specify the show that it is for in the subject line, as well as any special pronunciation of your name. You can also hit us on Discord. We have the Q and Podcast Questions channel, which is open for everybody. And we have the Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel, which we tend to look there first as a way of saying thank you to our Patreon subscribers for helping us keep the lights on. And you can also send us messages directly on Patreon. We're not talking about What If today. Instead, we're rounding out our Lorewalker discussion with, well, it's been renewed interest, especially online, and we've gotten asked about this a bunch. And this one actually came from Rob Flanagan, who you may have recognized from the site. Lorewalker Cho just seems to know too much. Is he really just a Pandarian or some Loa or August Celestial of knowledge and history? The question is, what are the Lorewalkers in general? And this has been around since they were first introduced in Mists of Pandaria. When we meet Lorewalker Cho, who's the first one we really meet, their power seems very incredible, right? Like, they're able to cut through the Shah influence almost instantly and with very little effort. Their magic makes things a reality, or at least a reality that you can experience for yourself. So either it's mind altering or perception altering in some capacity, which we've seen that magic elsewhere, but usually not wielded by folks like us. And they do seem to know a lot. And I'm not just saying like when they were presented like, oh, they're the history keepers of Pandaria, but they seem to know so much more. And when you first meet Lorewalker Cho, he sort of hints that he knows more than just what happens in the confines of the island. Like, I'm not misremembering that, right, Matt?
I don't think you are.
So the question is often asked, what are they? And I mean, there's many different things that they could be, but I'm curious, in general, Matt, do you have an opinion? Do you have something that you think they're closer to or stuff that they remind you of? Or do you think that they are just a lore MacGuffin?
To start with this, I'm going to have to say this is all just a theory.
Everything we say is going to be a theory today, really.
Yeah, but this one for me is theoretical, which means I'm not even sure I believe what I'm saying here. Usually it's like, well, I think this could be true and it's cool. In this case, I'm like, I think this could be true and it's cool, but I'm well aware that there could be lots of things I don't know about that could contradict it. But I'm going to start with a simple question. How old is Lorewalker Cho?
I don't think we know. Right?
Do we ever get the sense that Lorewalker Cho has been around for things that his lifespan should not have allowed him to be there for?
Well, the interesting thing is I did get that impression because, I mean, what is it? The one of the things he says sort of like leans that way, which is like when he introduces himself, I am known as a Lorewalker, a historian for my people as such. Knowledge is my armor, and I carry a quill in place of a sword. But like, that seems like his knowledge might have kept him alive for longer than he should have been.
Let me ask you another question. Do you and I both played during Wrath of the Lich King, right?
Mm-hmm.
We both went to the Storm Peaks.
Mm-hmm.
We both ran into an immortal Tauren who was appointed by Nosdormu and the Bronze Dragonflight to tell stories and collect stories after he died, trying to do that very thing, right?
Oh yeah.
Zarantor, the Eternal, I believe he was named.
Zarantor, yeah. The ghostly icy blue I think in game they're a druid, but they have a title, and that title is the Witness. I remember them.
And Zarantor, the Witness, is a druid apparently. He says he was taught by Cenarius himself,
Mm-hmm.
which means he was a druid before or during the time that Malfurion was coming up, because he predates the War of the Ancients. He's 10,000 years old.
Well, yeah, he even says
And
that, right? He was like, I was one of
Yep.
the first Tauren druids, one of the last generation taught by Shando Cenarius before the Legion.
Mm-hmm. So he isn't the only person with that title in game. There's Barlstroth of the Shifting Sands. Arakonos breathed upon him and bound him as a watcher. There was Jonathan the Revelator. He tells people he was empowered by the Timeless One himself and became the keeper of the Sacred Gong and eternal watcher of the Bronze Flight. There's Zarantor, which we know was also empowered by the Bronze Flight. Nosdorma was himself again. Then there's Reloshan, the Eternal Watcher. We don't know if she is a watcher of anything. We don't know if she's related to this guy's, but she was very much involved in the War of the Shifting Sands, and the Bronze Dragonflight definitely seemed to be flying over her positions and essentially guarding her. And that leads me to the Time Walkers. We know that the Time Walkers, we saw them, one of the places we saw the Time Walkers was in and on Pandaria, where they were basically poking around in time via the Timeless Isle. And it's through the Time Walkers and the Timeless Isle that we ended up with that whole Warlords of Draenor mess. Now, the Lorewalkers and the Time Walkers don't seem to be exactly the same group. But what if Cho is one of these chosen ones who is essentially granted eternal life in order to collect and understand stories, just like the rest of them all say they are?
Mm-hmm.
Like Zarantor specifically says, I'm going to see if I can find the quote, because I was just looking at this stuff because you told me we were going to do this. So there's a dialogue he has. The first thing he says when you click on him is, "Do you have a story for me?" And his next thing is, "Would you like to hear a story?" And that to me is like, when you finally get to the point where you can ask him questions, you're like, "Tell me of yourself, Zarantor. Why are you called the Witness?" I was one of the first Tauren druids of the last generation taught by Shando Cenarius before the Legion, before the Sundering, when the world was still young, before everything changed. Now, the Sundering affected everywhere on Azeroth, including Pandaria. Before the Sundering, Pandaria was physically connected to everything else, to the point where you could walk from Pandaria up to what's now Northrend. And I keep wondering about this. Zarantar says at one point, "When my brethren hunted great beasts, I hunted stories." And he says, "I was drawn to the druidic arts by this hunger, this lust for knowledge. Does this remind you of anybody?" So what if Lorewalker Cho was chosen not by, the ancients or the August Celestials, because this would have been before there was a difference?
Yeah.
Because before the world sundered, there's no difference between Pandaria and, say, what is now Kalimdor, or what was then Kalimdor or the Eastern Kingdom. You could go anywhere. The whole world was essentially reachable. You could just walk wherever you wanted to go, and you'd get there sooner or later. I feel like that's a possibility for Cho. And the reason that the Lorewalkers are distinct is not because they were started differently, but because they had 10,000 years of isolation.
Yeah, like you say that this theory is something that you're not sure you entirely believe, but out of all the theories that have been proposed, this is one that I've actually been thinking about too. And you brought up a lot of the same stuff that I was actually going to bring up, which I love when we're in sync like this. People have often, and before I go back into it, like the other theories that people have proposed is that, Cho is a actual bronze dragon, or that the Lorewalkers are an offshoot of the Bronze Flight, or that they're a completely different dragonflight altogether. But a lot of that is like because of how he talks with his serpent companion and items like that. but none of that really fit for me, right? It never really seemed to be the case, because also when the Dragon Isles opened up, my assumption is, had he been a dragon or dragon adjacent like that, he would have shown up, especially because the Lorewalkers do something very similar, not just to like what you've talked about, like the witnesses, like Jonathan the Revelator or Zarathar or Barastolf, but they do very similar things, sort of like the Time Walkers do. They observe history and they kind of keep the story going, right? Like Time Walkers are a little more militant about it, and they actually patrol the time ways, but in a way they sort of are these immortal guardians that sort of guard the lore. They guide the timeline, because the timeline is the story, right? And I like the idea that the Lorewalkers were actually empowered, not necessarily by a Titan, but by the bronze dragonflight, by why am I blanking on his name now? Nozdormu himself.
Yeah, Nozdormu or Anachronos, or any of the higher ups.
Yeah.
And also, let's for a moment think about the fact that doesn't mean that all Lorewalkers or all Time Walkers are directly empowered.
No, certainly not.
It means that there are ones that are. Cho feels like someone who is empowered in a subtle way. Like when you go with him into, like, during the Siege of Orgrimmar, the first part where you're going underneath the veil, Cho is he's excited, he's astonished, he is not surprised.
Same thing with Mogushan Palace and
yes,
the going through there as well, yeah.
He just isn't surprised by any of this, but he's amazed. He's like, I never thought I'd get to see one of these. Like the creation matrix that makes new Mogu. He's like so excited, but he's not like shocked. He's not like, I can't believe this is here. He's like, oh, good, this is here. And that's something I keep thinking about when I read that Zarantar quote, that he hungered for stories. That feels like Cho.
It does.
And I think the difference between the Time Walkers and the Lorewalkers could come down to the fact that on the rest of Azeroth after the Sundering, the dragons still had a direct influence.
Mm-hmm.
So they could recruit Time Walkers directly. But if Cho was stranded in Pandaria because the Emperor created that mist that he couldn't get out and they couldn't get in, he's basically left on his own. He's like, okay, it's just me now. I can't get any outside influence. I can't reach out to them. They can't reach to me. So I have to decide how I want to do my mandate. And Cho doesn't strike me as the kind of guy who wants to go and fight over time ways. That's not his deal. He wants to learn. He doesn't want to fight. He's certainly not afraid. He'll go into incredibly dangerous situations. He reminds me a lot of Bronn Bronzebeard, if Bronn Bronzebeard had an actual survival instinct.
Oh, yeah. But you raised another interesting point, though, too, which I think feeds into this. Lorewalker Cho is there at a lot of dangerous situations. Like, going back to the when we're digging up the basically the Mogu Palace, and we're going deep underground, and we fight the three long forgotten kings. Like their spirits are back and their forces are there. Lorewalker Cho's right there. Like, he's not hiding. He's not cowering. He's there, but he seems untouchable. And same thing with, like, why can't I remember the dragon's name? Elegon, the celestial dragon that's there.
Elgalon.
No, yeah.
Elgon? Maybe it's Elgon.
But either way, he's there. He knows what it is, and he's not afraid of it. Again, it's almost like he's untouchable. And it sort of goes in line with what we're seeing every time we've interacted with him. And I want to go back to, like, going back to the first meeting with him. He seems immune to the Shah. And we know that the Shah is born of the old god Yasharaj. So he's immune to old god, essentially. Which I think is really fascinating. Because we're not. Garrosh definitely wasn't. And what entities do seem to be immune from the physical corruption of an old god. Not many.
No, but you just made me think of something.
Go for it.
There's a dragon, a black dragon, on Pandaria who learns how to make capes that give you the ability to traverse to Ordos, who is obviously an elemental servant and not a happy-go-lucky one who likes things. He's an elemental servant of fire, which means one of the two elemental orders that has the biggest problem with old god corruption. He then later figures out how to make capes that protect you from old god corruption,
from going into the which is relevant for now because they're back, the visions, the twisted visions.
And he got that information where? Like, he made capes to give us power to protect ourselves and traverse the timeless isle in Mists of Pandaria. Later on in, I want to say it's Battle for Azeroth, right? That's where he does this. He makes cloaks, capes, to protect us directly from old god influence. Then and then basically, this is making me think that one of the things Wrathion might have been doing there was getting bronze dragonflight knowledge. And the reason I think that is because he eats the heart.
Yeah.
And the heart is an immortal thing. It is the essence of the god Aman'Thul. And Aman'Thul is the time one.
Yep.
Aman'Thul is the Titan who controls time. He is the one who empowered Nozdormu.
The one that the font is made out of his eye that Alessandra is protecting and using to do time magic.
And they can rival the bronze dragonflight.
Yep.
So it's quite possible that in Pandaria, this whole time was a power that could do to time what we see him do, because Cho just summons up, like, practically he's like, here's the story, and boom, you are in a slideshow of what's happening, but you're in the slideshow. Well, and they're moving around, and it's like, what? How could he possibly know this? And
it feels like it's a whisper of his power too, right? Like it's like you're right on there, like it's fully visualized, and it's not just something that he read in a book. Like it can't be, because he knows too many and sees too many specifics. But the other interesting thing, I think, going back into this is, like, that's a whisper of his power, because what we just saw on the PTR with Lorewalking is you are fully there. You are fully immersed in these moments. It's not a play. It's not ghostly images flickering across the stage like they are during the anniversary event, because that's what we saw. We saw the Lorewalkers telling stories and them doing that. No, you are fully transported. You are fully there. And, like, you fully feel that immersion. You are in that moment as that person. That is incredible magic. Where else have we seen anything close to that?
The Caverns of Time, where you actually do go there.
But you go there as yourself. You're physically going there. Yeah.
Yeah. Who to say that that's not what we're doing?
Yeah.
Like, think about it too. When Nozdormu is sending us to try and save Chromie from her infinite dragonflight counterpart, we go back to the Black Empire. During Lorewalking, when we're looking into the origins of Xalatath, we go back to the Black Empire.
Yeah. How could that be a thing that he knows existed in that visual media?
Yeah, except unless he was there 10,000 years ago, or maybe longer.
Yeah,
and keep in mind too that the Pandaren were created by the Mogu, and the Mogu were creations of the Titans. So there's lots of stuff the Pandaren might have had access to once they beat the Mogu, and they did that before the Sundering. Their uprising against the Mogu took place centuries before, to the point that when Ashara ascended to the throne of the Night Elves, when she became queen, they sent her an empty box with a riddle, like saying, this is what you will have if you have a hunger for power. This is your reward, and it's just an empty box. And she didn't. Ashara was unafraid to take on the full power of the trolls. Like, her people conquered the trolls and split them into two warring factions. They essentially pushed the Zandalari into, like, hiding away on their mountain for, like, eons. She didn't even try with Cho or with the Pandaren, let's say, because we don't know if Cho was there. But they didn't even try with the Pandaren. They got an empty box and they were like, "Okay, we're gonna just let that go."
And it's interesting because with the way we're laying it out here, I think his power is even more. I don't want to say impressive, but I think it's interesting because going back to the other Watchers that you laid out, the ones that are the witnesses or the Watchers, it seems like the Bronze Dragonflight, in particular Nozdormu, was able to almost like freeze a person in time, right? Like that is their version of immortality as far as I'm concerned. Because when the Dragonflights lost their power and the Aspects lost their power, Lorewalker Cho didn't rapidly age or anything. Like the witnesses are still there. They're still present. So it's not like they were granted immortality in the same way that like elves were or something like that.
Although, let's be fair, the elves didn't lose their immortality because of anything related to what the Dragonflights went through. They lost their immortality because the tree that was the anchor point got destroyed. If they're using the technique on the Watchers to just literally say, you don't go any further, like you don't age anymore, you won't, you don't die, this is where you are, that means that would last until they were destroyed, which they can't be because of it. But the tree wasn't keeping that power for itself. It was lending the power out to all the Night Elves. So as long as the tree was there, they had it. And the Dragonflights were still empowered when the tree got destroyed, and the elves were like, hey, could we have our immortality back? And they were like, no. So it wasn't related to that. It was a decision, but it wasn't one that, it didn't have anything to do with whether or not they still had their power. They still had their power, but the Night Elves weren't getting any more of it.
Sure.
And that makes me wonder if the reason that the Watchers are this kind of immortal is because they are directly interacting with Nozdormu as individuals.
Or directly recipient of his power or bound to him in some capacity, right?
Yeah, when Anachronos picks one of them and empowers him, he breathes on him, which is very similar to what happened when a life dragon breathed on Bolvar 4 Dragon.
Froze him in time.
Yeah, it didn't freeze him in time. It froze him in life.
Well, yeah, it froze him in life, but you know what I mean. Like
It basically said you can't truly go away because you are eternally alive, whether or not you want to be. He's the opposite of an undead. He's unalive. Like he can't die. And it's I think each of the Dragonflights could do that in their own way. Like you know that there are beings that have lived for like centuries empowered by the green Dragonflight. We've met them. And we know that there are people who have interacted with, with the black dragons who've lived for a ridiculously long time. So it does make me wonder, though, if Cho is directly... I think Cho is like literally the most likely to be directly empowered by Nozdormu in anything out of Pandaria. Yeah,
and I would agree with that. And I think there's an intention behind it too, right? Like all of the people that were chosen as witnesses or are in that sort of eternal structure, they're all kind of non-combatants, if that makes sense. Like,
yeah, they're watchers, they're witnesses, they're viewers.
Yeah, but they can intervene when they need to. They just usually don't.
Like Zarentor. Zarentor actually takes a fighting role during the Warsong offensive.
Yeah,
like he's there. He doesn't attack the Alliance, but if the Alliance attacks him, he fights back.
Yeah, and I think it's also telling that everybody who's chosen for these roles is raised from mortal races. And I think that's really, really, really interesting.
And they're all almost on the bridge of death, too. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, so like...
Of the ones we know about. Zarentor is literally dying in the woods when they find him. Jonathan, he gets breathed on by a bronze dragon while fighting.
We don't know which bronze dragon, which it is. Barislath, Anachronos finds him dying after the War of or during the War of the Shifting Sands.
The last one, who we don't know if she is one or not, we know nothing about her life at all. Like, but Rao Shadow, if she is one of them, we don't know if she was dying or not. But that doesn't mean she wasn't. That just means we don't know.
But the other interesting parallel with that is what are Watchers? Where have we heard that before?
The Titans, the Titan Watchers. Yeah.
And what was their role?
I mean, it was basically to try and sustain Azeroth. Like they were put there because the Titans couldn't directly intervene, and they needed somebody to be their arms and legs, because otherwise they'd crush the planet.
But why were they called Watchers and not Wardens or Tenders?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. Why were they called that? And for that matter, why did they try and stay out of Azeroth itself?
Yeah.
Like they built all those devices, everything. Like when we go to Mogoshan Vaults, the device that Sho is so knowledgeable about was a Titan construction.
Yeah.
Why did they make all that stuff and then just try and sit it out? To the point where Tyr realized, oh no, we need somebody who will actually get involved in Azeroth. You know, we need people who will actually come into this world. And when they made the dragons, like at least the ones we know were empowered by Nozdormu, are watching and collecting stories. Why are they doing that? Except that if stories are lost, what do you don't have knowledge of where you are?
Yeah, and I think it's also important because I think it ties in with a lot of the sort of the idea of it, right? Like keeping things in a direction or keeping things, and I'm going to air quote, true, requires reference points. And we've seen this again with the Bronze Dragonflight as the most likely of places. We saw this with the Caverns of Time. Why are we going to these places? We're going to these places to make sure these events occur, to stop the Infinite Dragonflight from messing with them, to stop them from happening. Why? These have to happen. These have to happen to maintain the timeline. We've seen that when you deviate from the timeline, weird stuff happens, right? Like the whole Warlords of Draenor thing. It altered the story. It altered what happened. It created its own offshoot by the simple fact of basically that bronze dragon opening that sort of pathway for Garrosh. And it didn't destabilize the main timeline, which I think is fascinating, but it existed and continues to exist in a paradox because it's not gone, because we still have the Magar orcs. They're here. They're present in our world. And if that timeline was completely erased, one would assume that they would be gone with it. But they're not. But I think it's the idea of the Lorewalkers and the Watchers and those is that they need to witness the history of what is happening, because if you don't, we've seen what happens with written word. Like, look at the discs on Organon.
The original ones got stolen and the copies were corrupted as hell.
And all of we talk about unreliable narrators all of the time. Like we can go back to Chronicle and compare Chronicles volume 1 through 3 and then the Grimoire. And the Grimoire points out the biggest glaring thing that we've never, we may have considered it, but it was never really spelled out in official capacity, is how can you trust anything in these books, because history is written by the victor. But instead of history being written by the victor, these Watchers see everything. They retell it as it is, not by the whims of whoever came out on top. The history isn't erased because it lives with them. And because they are eternal, because they cannot die, or, for lack of a better term, removed from that scenario, they become the lodestones. They become these touch points of which reality can anchor to. Like,
there you are. There you got to where I was thinking.
Go ahead.
I'm going to jump off of you here. It is also possible. We know that because of the original War of the Ancients, we know that time can be altered without destroying the future if you make the proper corrections at the right choke points.
Mm-hmm.
Because the War of the Ancients, as it originally was written, never happened. The War of the Ancients, as far as we're concerned, happened when Nozdormu was attacked by the old gods, and he created a time warp and sent back a mortal human mage and a red dragon to the past. And they acted to create the timeline as we now have it. And as a result of that, things are historical in the Warcraft setting that were not ever written about in the original books. They literally had those novels retconned the entire story of Azeroth, but they kept it going down the channel it was supposed to go. So there's plasticity there. Why would you want people to watch? Because that way you know what actually happened,
mm-hmm.
and you can't bend it as much. the less people know about what happened, it seems, the more variations can occur. And I think Worlds of Draenor is a really good example of what we're talking about here, in that enough things weren't really known that well outside of a few people that you could hit a timeline that was practically the same, like very, very similar, but certain things are not the same. No Garrosh was born because Garrosh's mother died. And so when he comes through and he talks to his father feels like this person is very familiar to me. He's carrying my axe. I don't think he had Gorhal at the point, but like when he picks the axe up and throws it to Grom is like, you're too familiar with this axe. Grom knows something weird is going on, but it's just different enough that it started throwing off sparks, for lack of a better word. The timeline started getting messed up. And I think that's one of the reasons that while that timeline didn't get destroyed, the world got destroyed. The end of the Maghar quest, we see like Draenor getting eaten alive by darkness.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and there's a lot of argument as to who's actually responsible for this. Is it the light? Is it the fell magics from before? But we don't know. At the end of the time, we don't know what's killing the planet. We just know that the planet is being killed. And I keep going back to this idea that they want watchers because they want anchors, like you said. When you use the word anchors, that was like, that's it. That's perfect. That's exactly what they want. They're trying to effectively chart the course of the timeway to keep it from bending too far out of bounds. Little things can happen. A couple people get sent back in time, but they only act to get the timeline going in the direction it's supposed to go. So they're not violating anything, even if they are taking action that they would otherwise not take. As long as their action is to preserve the timeway, that's great. But how do you preserve it if you don't know what it was? Like, that's why Crassus had to go. Crassus was there the first time. Crassus, in fact, you meet Crassus's younger self, Coriolestras, and the two of them can't be too close to each other, or they start dying. And I think that's really fascinating, because it implies, why would you make an immortal watcher instead? Because then you don't have to worry about the time person getting dead and not being able to do what you sent him to do. The only reason Crassus gets sent is because Nosdormu is desperate. He doesn't have anybody else to send. He's barely able to send him and Ronan back. Like, I really feel like had he been able to, he'd have grabbed somebody like Zarantar, because they would be able to go back and be immortal. And not, they wouldn't be. If Zarantar goes back and he's there, Zarantar's 10,000 years old. Zarantar was there,
mm-hmm.
but he wouldn't be affected because the Zarantar walking around effectively already died. So he's not drawing any life force from the other Zarantar, but he just didn't have the ability to do it. He just couldn't get him. He had to go with who he had. That to me seems like it has something to do with this. The idea that there's a balance to how you can monkey with time. And if you're not careful, you can make it a lot worse. But you can make changes as long as those changes are in line with the timeway, which means you have to map the timeway. The less that you know, the less you can do, because you don't know if you're going to make things worse or not. But if you know what you're doing, yeah, and that's why you need people who know things. You need people who hunger to know things. You need people who absolutely, desperately want to know things.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you raise a good point there, because every single one of them is hungry. They want to know. They're there for a reason, and I think that makes an interesting candidate pool, right? Because they have the courage to go into these weird situations. Like, every single one of them has displayed a massive amount of courage at some point, even with like Lorewalker Cho, the stuff that we've interacted with, even if he doesn't know that he can't die, being willing to be in confined spaces with large amounts of enemy forces, traveling to far distant lands, going into the unknown. Hell, for all we know, Lorewalker Cho was wandering around the Shadowlands as soon as that door was open. And
yeah, and also we do have to point out that there are worse things than death.
Yes. Oh,
in
absolutely.
The Warcraft cosmology. Just because you can't die doesn't mean it's going to be fun being stuck in the Shadowlands, being torn apart by
for eternity.
Yeah, like who knows if you could harvest anima from him? I mean, there's a lot of bad things that could happen in the Shadowlands that would just never end.
Yeah, but I just find it fascinating because every single one of them is this insane amount of bravery. Baristoloth, they fought in the War of the Shifting Sands. The War of the Shifting Sands was not exactly a happy-go-lucky time. Like
and like when a Syrian comes walking out of the freaking ruins and just starts turning people to pulp, or when dragons are getting pulled down by tentacle maws and getting their, we see their remains. It was as close to, it was a nightmare.
It was enough to, I was gonna say, it was enough to drive perfectly sane and stable night elves insane. Fandral Staghelm watched his son be eviscerated in front of him. It broke him in ways that we cannot even begin to imagine. And that's on top of
this is a guy who fought against the War of the Satyr.
Yeah.
So he wasn't exactly afraid of things. He wasn't, a coward.
And in the Silithid, and I'm just going to want to use this as an example, specifically because what poured forth from Ahn'Qiraj was just nightmare fuel. It wasn't just the Silithid. They were warped. It was old god infestation. It was more just absolute atrocious, vicious, they want to eat you type of things that they were holding back. War, at the best of times, is not exactly going to leave you unscarred. So for somebody like Baristoloth, going into that scenario willingly shows an incredible amount of bravery. So becoming a watcher, being bound to that, shows that, one, they're already willing to take on a burden, right? Each one of these, at least as far as we know, and we don't know Lorewalker Cho's story quite yet, but each of these...
we can do some things, but we don't actually.
I'm going to get there. We're going to get there. But Baristoloth went into that war willingly, fought for something he believed in, and showed incredible bravery. We can assume that because of Zarathar doing the exact same thing, that Jonathan the Revelator did the same thing, that he was present at some great sacrificial moment, and is now in charge of guarding the Eternal Gong. Lorewalker Cho, we can infer, probably did the same thing. For all we know, he was present at the, for lack of a better term, as a mortal, at the liberation of the Pandaren. When they go and broke off the shackles of their oppression and fought against insurmountable odds, against beings that could warp reality, that could fleshcraft, that could wield unimaginable power compared to what they had at the time, and did so likely willingly. At least we can infer this. This is, again, all speculation. We don't have any confirmation of this. And if I was Norznomu and I come back and I see this person telling the story of the battle to maybe young Pandaren, I want to know more about that story. And when I find out the level of bravery, the hunger for stories, the hunger for keeping alive tradition and memory, and making sure that generations to come know what actually happened, that's the person that fits that bill perfectly. And I don't know, I just can't get over that. It's like a common thread. It's like this insane amount of bravery that just leads them to be perfect watchers.
I don't have anything further to say about that other than, brother. Sometimes somebody just has a good idea and it sounds like it makes sense.
But I mean, I don't know. And again, we don't know that all the other Lorewalkers are empowered like this way. It is also entirely likely that it is just Lorewalker Cho. And I think part of that distinction is interesting because I don't think it's Lorewalker Cho that was doing the stage play during the anniversary. I could be wrong, but I think it was a different Lorewalker. And in then it was the ghostly forms and only the ghostly forms. And we've seen other Lorewalkers do this. And I think that might be a distinction of the power between them. Like the others might be mortal and that might be their role. But his is just, it seems different. It seems more powerful. It seems more sustained. The other thing I think is interesting is he always has at least, I think it's the red book with him. And while he has multiple books with him, there's, if I'm remembering correctly, and I could be wrong because it's been a while and I haven't gone through the content to individually confirm this, but he always had like one particular book with him, and it reminded me of the I forgot what they're called. They were like the chrono absorbers or whatever that we see in Dragonflight around Thaldraszus. Like if you go around and you actually see like the little crystals that you essentially absorb the time magic back into to put things back to where they need to be, but are also present at every portal that opens up to different areas of the different timeways. It feels kind of like that, or his scrolls feel kind of like that, where they might be serving some of the same function. And I don't know if that's something. I don't know if you have a feeling or any thoughts about that.
I think ultimately, I feel like the Lorewalkers, among other things that they are and that they do, they are genre savvy. Like there's a Pandaren you find in the Vale of Eternal Blossoms whose name is Loki, Lohki, and he tells the origins of Li Shen's death. He tells the origins of Alani, the Cloud Serpent, and I find myself thinking, let's say you're Lorewalker Cho and you are empowered by Nosdormu.
Mm-hmm.
But then you're cut off for whatever reason. Let's say the Sundering happens. You're cut off. You can't reach Nosdormu anymore. You're unable to reach outside of the mists that were created by the Emperor. What do you do? Like we're told that this Cloud Serpents are not related to the aspects. They're not related to the dragonflights. Well, then what are they? Where do they come from? We're told that they were there for thousands of years, right?
We are, and they definitely seem to have the ability to align with elements.
We also see that the Jade Serpent an aspect. It's an Alga Celestial. It's not an aspect like the dragons are, but it is a powerful wild god. So I started thinking about, like, you make a deal. You go maybe not to the Jade Serpent, maybe you go to some other powerful Cloud Serpent / August Celestial, but you go and you say, hey, I need help. Because I think it's really interesting that the one of the stories we're told about is how the Jade Serpent's offspring fought the Zandalari when the Zandalari came after the fall of the Mogu the first time, and they helped fight them off. Like there's a famous piece of art of a Pandaren riding a Cloud Serpent.
Wow! I just remembered something. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go for it. I want to see what you got because I want to see if you're going where I was going.
Oh man, no, I'm just remembering. Like you remember, Loki, you like telling the origin story of Alani, right? Like the Stormborn, the one that's like rolling around the Vale of Eternal Blossoms. The description of that birth is just lightning striking the pool of water in the center of the Vale of Eternal Blossoms that we are assuming is Titan blood, or at least Titan blood adjacent.
Well, I mean, we know that the Vale of Eternal Blossoms, the waters were changed by the extracted essence of Amanthul.
Yeah.
The Titan who controls time. So what if Alani and the other Cloud Serpents were created by, say, Lorewalker Cho with help from the Jade Serpent, because the Jade Serpent would be a wild god that he could turn to, and that bolt of lightning hitting the well is literally him doing time magic to change some other animal into a Cloud Serpent, pushing it further along its evolutionary path. And that would explain why they need to be hatched from eggs, why they still they live normal mortal lives, despite the fact that we see that they can attain ridiculous amounts of cosmic power. Because Alani is literally like a thunderstorm showing up, and the only ones like her are similar to her. When you go to the Thunder King's island, he's got one. And how did he get one? Unless he too used the same Titan knowledge that we know they had, because he got the heart of Raden, and Raden was the one who pulled Amanthul's essence out of himself in the first place.
It also should be pointed out that there's some credence to this, at least as far as I'm concerned, because in the time walking scenarios, how do you get around? How do you go from point A to point B in the different chapters of the stories? You ride on the back of Mishi, the Cloud Serpent companion of Lorewalker Cho, who physically
Yeah.
carries you to different essences of time, essentially, to experience these moments.
And if you've been in a time walking dungeon, you've ridden around on a dragon's back several times.
Mm-hmm.
And the dragon was a bronze dragon, obviously.
Yeah, there's something here. There's definitely a link there, and you might be on to.
Whether it's, it might not be that Nosdormu directly empowered them. It might be as simple as Cho, a young Cho, while fighting during the Pandaren Rebellion, fell into the well of, like, the water at the heart of the Veil of Eternal Blossoms, and came out essentially like saved from death by the power of Amenthul.
Mm-hmm.
In this same way. Maybe he wasn't directly empowered by Nosdormu, and that's why his Lorewalkers aren't the same as the Time Walkers, because he never got a chance to be guided by an aspect. Maybe the Jade Serpent was the only one around who could even give him a clue on it, because since she's a reincarnating being, she essentially understands the veil and its purpose. We don't know, but we do know that there's enough there to definitely make it feel like there's some connection, in much the same way that when we went in Legion and we went to Queen Elysan, she's got the abilities that she can rival Nosdormu's servants with, because she's got the artifact from Amenthul. So yeah, it feels to me like it is. There's definitely a connection. There's some sort of similarity here, whether it's as direct as Nosdormu showed up and said, "You live." Although it would be hilarious to me if Nosdormu and the other dragons had a visage that looked like a cloud serpent.
Yeah.
Like when they got there, they saw the cloud serpents, were like, okay, we'll look like that here. That way they'll just do what we tell them, because they'll think we're those things.
Yeah,
I think that's all I got. Yeah.
No, I mean, but I think it's interesting too that now Lorewalker Cho is walking along the Alliance and the Horde.
He gets to get their stories, yeah.
He's getting their stories, and I think that becomes increasingly important as sort of like the story of the expansions moves forward, because again, we go back to the thing we talked about, anchor points of reality, where knowing the stories and knowing what happens is necessary. And we talked about time altering and how things can sometimes get skewed, or even going further, how we have altered time by directly interfering or indirectly interfering, maybe by going back to the Black Empire and showing N'Zoth that his death was imminent.
We went to Stratholme and essentially fought like alongside Arthas Menethil.
Yeah.
The Infinite Dragonflight were doing stuff, and we went back and stopped them, but Arthas still saw it. Even if he didn't stop to think very hard about it, he still knew it was happening. He's like, oh yeah, Mal'Ganis is up to something. It's like, dude, they're dragon things. But he never even, like, I don't know. It's one of those things that every so often I wonder about with Arthas. Like, was he kind of nutty by the end, like thinking, time travel's happening, whatever. I don't have time for this.
Yeah, I don't know, but it seems like there's more. It's not an accident that Lorewalker Cho is coming back and telling the stories that he is now. It's not an accident that time walking is a thing, and it's not just to refresh people on the story. Again, we've talked about this in the previous episodes, where it's filling in blanks and propelling the story forward in all of the cases. Maybe not necessarily the way that you would assume when you're going through them, because a lot of players will make the assumption that they know what happened, but Cho is filling in blanks that he shouldn't know, or are really interesting.
Especially the first three ones. Yeah, absolutely. The first three ones. Why is he so informed on this?
Yeah, where did that information come from? And again, like, the calm nature of how it's presented, it isn't I bartered for this. It's never that, I don't want to say that distinct. It's never that obtuse. This is fact. This is what happened. This is the connections.
Trust the word of one who knows. I know this. This isn't me. I'm not supposing. I'm not speculating. I'm not Rossi and Perez over there. I know this.
And there's another aspect of it. And again, mild spoilers. We're at the end of the episode, so you can come back in like a minute here if this is. You pointed this out when we were talking about it. Even he didn't understand the connection between Venari and Locust Walker. In the memory, he goes, oh, like his magic is showing us this. And he didn't
he
know
doesn't
it.
know what's happening. Yeah.
So how is that even possible?
How is he capable of showing us things he himself doesn't know? That is actually a really good point.
Like that is a fascinating thing oh man. Lorewalker Cho is one of my favorite characters simply because of the infinite potential that they contain. But like, yeah, like how does that occur? Or is Lorewalker Cho hamming it up for us? Does Lorewalker Cho know more than they let on? But it's not the
how
right.
is that possible?
But it's not time for us to know yet, right?
Yeah, or he wants us to think about it.
Because
like
if he just tells us we're not.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I think we were both to say the exact same thing. If it's one of those things that they actually say in a Diablo game, Akaret we're chasing down Akaret's tomb, and you ask him, how come you didn't just tell us it was here? And he goes, if I just told you it was here and you got here, you wouldn't have gotten here. Like you had to find it to be worthy to get to it. Like if we just get told everything, some things you can tell us, but some things we have to experience, and some things we have to understand the experience. Like it's not enough that we experience it; we have to get what we're seeing, and that you can't teach that. You have to let people make their own mistakes, fall, do things, make choices. This has to be learned, but it also has to be earned.
Yeah, and I think there's also an element too of it where. And there's a concept in parallel with what happens with Anduin in the War Within, where you are not necessarily in the right place to know the truth or to understand in that moment, and it's not yours to have until you are actually ready. You might not be in the best mental space, or like a lot of times, let's say we're coming right off the heels of hunting Xalatath, and we just had a moment where, going back to the beginning of the expansion, we see Khadgar get sucked into the Dark Heart. Do you think we give a damn about Xalatath's past at all at that point? No. But now, where things are getting more complicated, and Khadgar's back, and we have more information, not enough, not the whole picture, but more than we did at the beginning. And we're starting to understand that there is a more complex battle or give and take happening in the background. That's sort of the perfect time to do that. And I don't think that's an accident. I think Lorewalker Cho is, again, that anchor point for reality. He makes the story available to us when we need it, when it is important, when it is the most impactful. And maybe like the time walkers themselves, like the folks that go through the timeways and are stewards and wardens of it, this is the Lorewalker way of keeping reality on point by choosing when the stories are retold for maximum impact, or to make sure that the information is delineated at the right moment, to keep us from making a decision that skews the timeline so bad that direct intervention is necessary. Those, again, like you said earlier, those subtle nudges, the subtle corrections, the little tiny adjustments, instead of the huge swinging, I'm going to rip this pocket of reality off and throw it into the void. Maybe there's an element of that too. Well, I mean, we've talked a lot. Is there any parting thoughts about Lorewalker Cho, the Lorewalkers, that you would like to impart to our wonderful listeners?
If nothing else, Cho is brilliant at getting people to blunder into situations that require them. Like every time that I've gone with Cho someplace, I ended up fighting all sorts of things because it had to be fought. And yeah, he's just... I obviously feel he must know what he's doing.
Yeah, he has to.
Even if he acts like he doesn't, it feels like he must, because otherwise he's just the luckiest SOB in the existence of the universe. So either he's blessed by luck or he's doing this on purpose.
I mean, and he could just be the luckiest Pandaren in the world, but I don't think so. There's the old saying, it's better to be lucky than good. I don't think that's the case with Lorewalker Cho. I think it's better to be good than lucky in his case. But
you make your own luck.
You make your own luck. But I think that's going to do it for us today on this episode. I do want to thank you for joining us on this weird, wild, and wacky and insight into what we think Lorewalker show is. And Rob, hopefully that helps you, or hopefully it has more questions spawn in your brain, because then you get to live like we do. Do you want to remind you, friends, that if you have questions for this or any of our podcasts or a topic you want us to cover, go ahead and send those in to podcast@blizzardwatch.com. Specify the show that it is for in the subject line, as well as any special pronunciation of your name. If you want to hit us up on Discord, we have the Q and Podcast Questions channel. Same rules apply. If you are a Patreon subscriber, you can hit us up on the Patreon Q and Podcast Questions channel. And if you want, you can go ahead and send us messages directly on Patreon. We look there first. It's our way of saying thank you. It keeps this show going, as well as all the rest of our shows. With that, folks, we'll see you next week.